All right, we are recording and we're back after a week break. Sorry for all our listeners who missed us. Just needed a little break to get caught up here. But, Mike and Ken are back with us to discuss more about my uncle's escape from Alcatraz and a lot of the things that we're doing deep dives in. And we've gone over the entire story. Now we're kind of going back to the beginning and also kind of tracing the roots of what's going on. And some information and some interesting information came out in the news this past week. There was an article. And Cindy, why don't you tell them a little about the article that came out?
Well, the article was talking about, obviously, the book and the case, but also about this letter that had been sent to the U.S. Marshals, I believe.
It was U.S. Marshals.
I just want to make sure it's clear. And the letter was supposed to be written from John Anglin.
Right.
But in the article, they were going on, is this letter real? Is it not real? But we wanted to talk to Ken and Mike and see what their thoughts were on this infamous letter. We actually have it, a picture of it. And so just tell us a little bit about the background of the letter, Ken.
Yeah, before we show it.
Sure. Well, the first time I ever heard about the letter, I believe it was around 2018. We were contacted by the History Channel. They had gotten word that it was going to be published in a local newspaper. Somehow it got leaked from the U.S. Marshals to the newspaper. The U.S. Marshals obtained it either around 2010, 2011, and it was going to be leaked to the newspaper. And so the History Channel wanted to know, would we be interested in updating the documentary that we did in 2015? And I was like, sure. This was my first time ever seeing the letter. And after I read it, I had some thoughts on it, that I can definitely share in this podcast.
Okay, all right, cool. Good. So let's pull up the letter. All right, so here's the letter. It's hard to read. It's real faded because I'm sure it's been Xeroxed numerous times. So, Ken, you've read the letter a few times. Mike, I'm sure you've read the letter. So kind of tell us what the contents of this letter is.
Well, whenever they received it, the contents is really around John writing their authorities. He goes in telling about, the night of the escape, just briefly saying, I'm John Anglin. I'm the one who escaped from Alcatraz in June 1962. He says, we barely made it that night. I guess he kind of indicates that they had some type of a mishap or trouble. He goes into saying how that Frank Moores had died in 2000, and I believe it was 5. I'm looking at the letter at this minute. He gives a general location about where he was buried at. Said it was up under an assumed name. He gives a date of when his brother Clarence died. I believe it was 2011. But he goes in talking about having cancer, and he was wanting to turn himself in if they would, the authorities would promise to give him medical care, access to medical care in prison. He said he would agree to, stay up to 1 year in prison. And then he wanted them to publish this letter in the newspaper. He kind of gives a brief description that he at one time was living in Seattle, and at one time they were living in Southern California. And he pretty much ends it saying, I'm waiting to hear from I'm waiting to hear back from you, which the authorities, never did any of this.
Yeah. So what do you think? Does this look like your uncle's handwriting? Does this look authentic? It seems like it's leaving out a lot of information.
Yeah, I would probably, when I first read it, my first thoughts around it was, we're now learning about it in 2018. The authorities received it in 2010, 2011. And my first thoughts were, if this had been from John, why in the world didn't they share this with the family right off the bat? If it had been him and he was dying of cancer, why would you wait almost 5 to 6 years before you ever told anyone about it? But after you kind of read it, which I have, the first thing that stands out to me is, I don't know how many people that are listening to this podcast have ever been in prison, but I cannot imagine that you would be living in a country like Brazil or maybe even Canada, because some people had thought they had gone to Canada, where they had free health care, and you're going to give up that and come back and go and get prison health care, which I can promise you is probably not very good. According to James Whitey Bulger, he had written several times about the health care he was receiving in prison. And, that to me stands out right there. John would never leave somewhere where he could get free health care and come and want to go back to prison to get prison health care. I mean, that doesn't even make sense. So.
Yeah. And I think Cindy pointed out, because when we were reading it off camera, it almost seems like it's someone whose English is not their first language.
I've lived in 5 countries. This is written by someone, in my opinion, that does not have good grammar, English skills at all, but also feels like it's second language. It doesn't feel like this is someone whose native language is English.
Right. Well, and 2, every single letter, I went back and kind of verified it, but every letter that John wrote home to his mom and dad, and even on the Christmas cards, he always wrote John William Anglin. This one does not have William Anglin in it, just John Anglin. So to me, it's someone, there's been a lot of nuts and crazy people that have tried to interject themselves into this story. There was a lady out in Seattle that reached out to us multiple times, and even the authorities, the U.S. Marshals, said she was a nutcase, claiming that John and Clarence and Frank Morris were living right down the road from her, and that she was going to parties with them. And she sent photos of them that weren't even close to being them. But I mean, could this letter have come from her? Maybe. I'm not sure.
Did they do a handwriting analysis on it?
They did. And if you, the U.S. Marshals, the U.S. acting marshal at that time was Michael Dykes, and he did a hand writing analysis, or had it done, and it didn't even come close. And that, he said, that was one of the reasons they never shared it with the family, because they knew right off the bat it wasn't legit.
Then why release it if it wasn't? That's kind of strange.
It's interesting why they leaked it. Why would they release it to the press?
I asked that question. According to Marshal Dykes, he doesn't know who leaked it to the newspaper, but it did get leaked.
Got it. So it got leaked.
So, somehow it got out there. And once it got out there, the History Channel found out about it, and either before it came out or right as it was about to come out. And so they wanted to jump on it and include it into the documentary that we had done in 2015.
Do you have did you send me the envelope too of where it came from?
I did. It was,
I don't think we can put it up. We just said,
I believe it was mailed in San Francisco. I believe it was. I can pull it up and look real quick, but
you sent it to us too, right?
Yeah.
I did. It was the second document that I sent.
Yeah, fortunately for us, Ken's mother saved all the prison letters that John and Clarence had sent out, and it was multiple letters, and not only just from Alcatraz, but prior to Alcatraz when they were incarcerated at other prisons. And John had a very distinctive way of writing, as we all do. But one of the things that he did, like Ken said, he always used either his middle name or middle initial. Mm-hmm. But he also had the habit of putting dots after words, which was an interesting thing that he did. And there are no dots at all.
Yeah.
So that was just his style, and he did that for years and years. So that's just how he wrote things.
Yeah, no, the postmark is from San Bernardino, California.
Okay.
And it's October 22nd, 2013 at 7 p.m.
But there's another stamp on there. If you look down toward the bottom. Yeah.
But it's addressed to Richmond Police Station in San Francisco.
Right.
It was sent to the police station.
Yeah, and from there it went to the U.S. Marshals. That's
kind of interesting too. Why would you do that? That kind of throws me, because I'm sure they were fully aware, whoever was chasing them. I mean, they were speaking to Uncle Man, Robert,
right,
for a while, through that whole process. And so the fact that they would go to Richmond, that's such just because it's the closest police station to Alcatraz.
Well, and if your whole goal, if you were John Anglin and your whole goal was to get this into the newspaper so that you would have some type of a document, why not send it directly to the newspaper?
I
I mean, why would you send it to the police station, or why would you not send it directly to the FBI? At that point, I'm assuming they thought, John would probably have thought that the FBI would have still been in control of the case. But and two, what really stood out to me about this letter, too, it almost sounds like John saying, "Oh, for the last 50 years, we've been just kind of tooling around the California and up in Seattle. We hadn't really been doing anything." It's like, okay, wait a minute. So who buried Frank Morris? I mean, who paid for that? Who buried his brother? Who paid for that? So a lot of it just didn't make sense.
Mm-hmm.
So I never really held. Now there are some family members, and that kind of believe that it might be from him, but I personally do not believe it.
Did they ever do any kind of fingerprint analysis or DNA analysis on the envelope? I'm sure they did.
Well, we don't have the envelope nor the letter. Now, those are just copies that the U.S. Marshals gave us. So, they undoubtedly have the originals.
Well, like you said, it was leaked, so they don't believe that it's accurate. And it's weird that it came from San Bernardino.
Yeah,
that's just a bizarre place.
And two, another thing that stood out to me was at that point in time, John, and I've said this to two U.S. Marshals, John could walk right by them, John or Clarence, and say 2015, 2014, they would not have known who those men were. I mean, James Whitey Bulger, when he was on the run, went out to Alcatraz twice, and no one knew who he was. Yeah. So the fact that he could not have gone to any public, healthcare system. I mean, there's people who do not have insurance and they have cancer. You can go to any public place and get treatment. You might not get the treatment that you're wanting, but you can get treatment. And then why would he not reach out to family members? At this point in time, his family, his siblings would have given anything to help him.
Sure.
So I just cannot believe that he's out there all by himself. He's roaming, the state of California, and he has no one to help him, and he's trying to go back to prison. That in itself just doesn't even make sense.
No.
So.
Yeah.
Is Downey in San Bernardino?
No, Downey's in LA County.
Okay.
Not even San Bernardino is where the whole thing.
Oh,
but that's out near Malmo, or actually Big Bear.
But it does. What I do like about the letter, it keeps it in the the forefront of people's mind.
Yeah, Ken and I, we've gotten many emails and on our Facebook page. Hey, have you heard about this letter? What's the deal with the letter? We get, regularly we get contacted by people who find out about it. They see it on the internet, and I get our opinion or thoughts about it, and we say, nah, it's not real, fake letter. Don't worry about it.
Mm-hmm.
Move on.
Yeah, no, it definitely doesn't. It doesn't. I mean, the dates that he says about Frank Morris and about his brother. I mean, does that make sense?
No, he doesn't even tell where Clarence was buried at. I mean, he gives a date, but he doesn't tell where. Frank Morris, and I believe I spoke to the marshals. That is a legit town, but I mean, buried under an assumed name. I mean, gosh, how many people are buried in this town? I mean, you never would be able to find them. So
yeah. To me, that that photograph you showed me of a potential son of his is just staggering. Or I don't know if it's a son or a grandson.
Looks just like him.
It looks creepily like him.
Yes. So you're referring to the information I sent you about down in Brazil. Yes. Yeah. And, the weird thing is that was all in that same area that the farm would have been in. So, if you were getting a passport created or documents created, you would have gone to that town. The largest town near the farm would have been that town. So, and I mean, you look at the child, it does have some similar characteristics of an Anglin.
Yeah. Well, I guess we'll have to. I mean, we've given Art enough time to read the book, so I think we should check back.
I want to ask him about this letter.
Yeah.
I mean, this is interesting.
I'm sure he absolutely knows about it.
I'm sure there's a lot, we know
does.
that in true crime, there's a lot of people that are weird and will do weird things like this. But I am curious as to why it got leaked.
So this got leaked what year again?
Well, like I said, now in 2018, Art was actually with me. It was Art, my brother, and myself. We went back and did a little updated clip on the show, and I believe that it came out with another name. It was Alcatraz, The Lost Evidence. It was basically the same 2015 show, but they just removed the Alfred, of us exhuming Alfred, and they replaced it with the letter that came out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, because this was released. When was it released?
I believe it was 2018.
Okay, so they had it for a good 5 years before they.
Yeah. That was the one thing that really kind of, I want to say it was upsetting by the family, was the fact that, so let's just say, for instance, that it was John, and you held on to this letter all this time, and you never released it, to the family. At least call the family and say, hey, your brother reached out to us, and we're trying to, but maybe we're going to reach out and help him and get him, picked up and get him some help. I mean, they never even said anything to us. But then again, Marshall Dyke said the reason they didn't was because they didn't hold a lot of light that it was even worth contacting the family over. So,
well, and also, let's say that really was John. He's older, his handwriting has changed for whatever reason. How would you get a hold of him? How would you reach out to him to say, okay, let's make a deal?
Right.
Surrender yourself. Would you put it on TV and, America's Most Wanted or newspaper? I mean, how would you get information to him?
Yeah. I mean, there's no return address.
nope.
There's no other information. It's
Yeah, the only thing he said, he wanted it published in the newspaper, and he would contact them after it was published. But
I mean, it makes
he gave
sense.
no ways of
He
contacting.
probably, let's just pretend for a second it's real. He wouldn't want to give out his information unless they agreed to what he was asking for, right? So
Correct.
so that's why he didn't put it in the letter. So then if he's saying, okay, here, newspaper, you guys print it, and then I'll reach out to them and see what their deal is going to be, right?
That doesn't make sense either, because
No.
if you really wanted the impact, you would send it straight to the newspaper.
Well, yeah.
You're exactly
You
right.
wouldn't send it to the Richmond Police Department.
No.
You're exactly right.
I mean,
Or you would have sent at least 2 copies. You sent one to the
Yep.
yeah.
to the authorities and say, "Hey, I'm publishing this in the newspaper." At the same
Do
time,
you know for sure that this is the only people that received it? We don't know.
all we know is what the U.S. Marshals told us. So.
Right.
And
Let's talk to Art again.
you can't actually. Sometimes I don't really believe that they share everything with us.
No.
So,
No.
I mean, there's clearly things that they have not shared with us.
Yeah. Yeah. That's crazy. It's a crazy thing when you first learned about it, were you at least, it had to pique your whole family's interest.
Like I said, I was intrigued. I, kept an open mind, but I'm one of these kind of people that once I read it and really start thinking logically about, what is it trying to say? And I quickly picked up, okay, this can't be John's writing because this doesn't even come close to any of his other letters. It makes no sense, like I said, why he would leave another country that had free healthcare to come to a place where I would go and get prison healthcare. I mean, that in itself doesn't even make sense. So.
Yeah. It doesn't seem like it's in their character either. These guys are pretty tough dudes.
Yeah.
I mean, I think.
I will say this though, living in 5 countries that I have where there is free healthcare, a lot of people would prefer to come back to the United States, even if it was prison healthcare.
Or even
like for real, like people were like, I gotta fly out of this country. I can't stay here. I gotta get healthcare. I mean, it can be a little, sometimes you have to wait like a year to get treatment. Like it's insane. Like you wouldn't expect that, but yeah, I mean, is it logical? No. And these guys seem pretty, like Rob said, they're tough. They're going to reach out to their family, I think, first.
Yes.
I can't imagine they wouldn't have reached out to your family first.
Well, and I can't imagine that prison health care would have given him anything more than he could have gone down to the local health department or, gone to some free, and there's free services out there. Or, like I said, he could have reached out to family members and, family members could have pulled together and helped him. But, none of that ever happened. So
now, is it possible that someone who knew them wrote it?
Of course, it's always possible that someone could have written the letter for him. But then I go back into, okay, if you've got friends that you're staying with, that you've told them who you really are. Okay, so now you've got someone outside of just you knowing this. Why would he have divulged that information to someone like that? But yet he never reached out to the family member.
No, I don't.
If he's willing to take that risk,
I don't believe that.
Having someone else know about it, why would you not involve other people?
But what I am thinking is maybe after they died, if this person who is writing like they're writing in a different, language, if they knew them in Brazil or Mexico and is writing this after the fact, maybe they knew John was already passed. I don't know. It's something, there is something there, but I don't know what it is that's bugging me.
Yeah. It just, like I said, the fact that it's, the return address is, or not the return address, but the postage stamp on it is from San Bernardino, California.
Yeah.
I mean,
it
seems like it's a hoax. Someone's trying to
I agree.
stir the waters, or better yet, just to kind of, someone who's fascinated with the case, and it's a way to get attention. And there's a lot of crazy people out there.
And when it comes to this kind of stuff, people want attention so badly.
You're right. And to me, go ahead, Mike.
If John was serious, again, if this was John and this was serious, he was like, I'm tired of running. I just need to get health care. And if the first one obviously didn't work, why not try again? Why not send another letter, reach out to somebody else, try some alternative means? And that never happened. It was just a one and done.
Yeah. And like Cindy said, if they truly were dying of cancer, I wouldn't really care about being caught. I would reach out to my family members.
Mm-hmm.
Especially how close they were with you guys.
Right.
There's no doubt in my bones that they wouldn't reach out to the family first.
Oh, of course.
Or at least at the same time.
Or at the same time. Or say, look,
exactly.
I'm sick. I need to get health care.
Right. Exactly. If he was dying of cancer, he would have, like you said, he wouldn't have cared if he'd have been caught, and he would have reached out to the family. So.
Exactly. Because if his brother's already dead, Frank's dead, where is he? He's alone, and if he's in San Bernardino, he's obviously not around his other family members that he's.
Well, yeah. And something, so the place that he's claiming Frank was buried at, if I remember right, is in Virginia, and he's out in California, in Seattle. So did they keep in touch with each other? It's like, at some point in time, it sounded like they split up, or maybe they were in Virginia at one time. I don't know.
Yeah.
He kind of indicated in the letter that they stayed out in Seattle and in Southern California. So he never mentions anything about traveling to, and that's just it. He gives such vague information and nothing that's really, it would be information that only they would know, to really prove that this is John Anglin. And that what he says, like, oh, I'm telling the truth, I'm not lying. It's like, something about that just doesn't sound right.
No.
Yeah, and just the handwriting. His handwriting was really good. Like when the samples that we've seen, as far as the letters and the cards and everything like that.
Right.
And that really, to me, it doesn't really change. I remember my mom had beautiful handwriting, and when she was dying of cancer, she was filling out paperwork and cards. Her handwriting didn't change. You can match that handwriting all the way back to when she was in her 20s. So this handwriting looks markedly different than from the cards and the letters that we've seen.
Yeah, and you look at the handwriting of Whitey Bulger when he was old and in prison about to die. I mean, look at how neat his handwriting was.
Yeah.
So I totally agree.
Yeah, and that's because that generation, they were drilled like penmanship. You got a grade for penmanship back then. I mean, we got it when we were kids too. You got a grade for pen. So they were really, the cursive. I mean, cursive is basically gone now. Very few people, they don't even teach it anymore. So the fact that, that doesn't go away. That's like riding a bike.
Right.
So it's very interesting. It's thought provoking. But at the same point, it doesn't really if I had seen that letter before I read the book, I'd be more inclined to think that maybe it could be him. But knowing what we know now and knowing all the stuff that you and Mike have detailed to us and ad infinitum, I mean, there's no way I believe that. I mean, I just look at it and it just doesn't look credible.
No.
But I'm glad that, I mean, like you said, the best thing about it is keeping it in the limelight. It just kind of, so, and I think, your book out there right now is probably what regenerated it, between, what's going on with it and the information that's being talked about. I mean, people can't get enough of the story because it's just such an incredible story.
Yeah, it is amazing how this book has, I believe, generated a lot of talk and has brought the subject of Alcatraz back up.
For sure.
To many people.
So the other thing I want to talk about the book. Mike brought this up earlier on in an email, and I think it's probably interesting for the viewers because we talked a little bit about how you guys did the book and how you kind of wrote the book and did the research, but I don't think people really understand the level of work that's involved, not only just writing the book and doing the research, but getting it published and working with a publisher to really, get it out there. So Mike, why don't you tell us a little bit about that journey and because I'm sure like anything, it wasn't smooth sailing.
Yeah, no book is. It was funny because, prior to this book, I was mostly a novelist. I'd published other novels in the past over the years, and it just sort of had run its course. And I was kind of like, I think I'm done with writing books. I'm not really interested. I was kind of shifting more towards screenplays and thinking maybe I can do something with film and television, which is much, much harder, of course, than publishing. But I thought I'd give it a shot. And then in the meantime, of course, I meet Ken. And when I start hearing the story from him, and because I first, we talked about this before, first finding out about who he was in the story from the 2015 History Channel show, and then when Ken was ready to work with me, we started with because he had written a screenplay prior to me meeting him, and he sent it to me, and he'd never written a screenplay before, and I had some training in that, from my experiences. And I thought, he actually did a pretty good job for never having done it before. I thought it was going to be really terrible, but it was actually pretty good. I was pleased about that. I just felt he just wrote the wrong story. That it was a story that the part of the story that television and film producers wouldn't want to do. It was more the growing up years, and they'd want to know more about what happened after Alcatraz. I felt that was more where the next part 2 of the story was where it was going to go. But we wrote a pilot for a proposed TV show. The pilot is the first episode of that you sell a show to a network. And with Ken's connections, from History Channel and other producers, we started shopping it around and trying to get something going. And over the years, and we do kind of talk about this a little bit in the book in the later chapters about kind of hit and miss of people feeling like, oh, this is going to sell. It's just a matter of time, if not when. And when that really didn't work, and we had done a little bit of research at this time to kind of get a little bit more details for the story, it started to occur to me that the only way that because Ken was wanting to tell his uncle's story, and when we would talk to producers, they wanted to talk about the escape and after the escape, and they weren't really interested of getting to know John and Clarence. And that was what Ken's desire was. They wanted to do more documentaries, and Ken was saying, I've already done the documentary. I'm not interested. I don't want to do that. And it started to sort of dawn on me that I thought the only way that we're going to get this thing done is we're going to have to sit down and write a book about it. I was reluctant at first because it's like, I know how much work it is to write a book. This is at least a year or 2 of your life just to write it and research it. And this was going to be way more involved because when you write fiction, it's just coming out of your imagination. You're just trying to tell a good story with good characters and good plot points. But when you're writing something that's true, you got to do your homework. You got to have documents. You got to have, primary sources. You got to have newspaper accounts of the time, contemporary sources, interviews from people who were involved in some directly or indirectly. And, because we're purporting that what we're saying is the truth, well, we can have our ideas and our theories, but that doesn't mean it's true. And so we have to back up everything. And so that meant going to libraries, going online and digging on multiple sources, again, interviewing people, talking to people, looking at old newspaper clippings, the FBI report, of course, we've scoured that thing who knows how many times, looking for information that's pertinent that we felt, added to the story that we included in the book. So 2 years of writing, editing, our approach was, I'd write a chapter, send it to Ken, he'd edit it, clean up the details, and then Ken would write his chapter, send it to me, and I would work on it. And we just kind of went back and forth until we were happy with it, until we felt that, okay, this is the story that Ken wanted to tell. Because, my job was to tell Ken's story, his way, the way that he wanted to do it. So I was getting all the information from him to write the chapters, and of course, getting all the documentation that he already had, or that we were coming up with along the way. And then once the story was, or I should say the book was done, then we had the task of trying to pitch it to agents, literary agents. Because we were aiming for bigger publishers. You can go with small publishers where you don't need an agent to approach them, but then they're also very limited on what they can do to promote the book. How much are they going to help you? And if for a small publisher, basically nothing. They don't really help you very much. They're like, okay, go sell your book. We gave you the money to print it. Yep. And that was another long months and months and months and months and months of sending out what are known as query letters to literary agents who already have many, many clients. They take very few clients, especially when they're the bigger names. And it took us hundreds of query letters until we finally got a response from one that ultimately signed us.
That's great. That's great.
That's awesome.
I like what you guys did with the book as far as from my perspective, as far as when I was reading it, the beginning part of the book where you did all the backstory about who these guys were, their family structure, what they went through and all that. To me, that really kind of hooked me in, and it gave me it gave me stakes and emotion, and I got attached to these guys. I got attached to their characters. You guys did a great job explaining who these guys were from age, like very young age, like 5, 6, 12, and what they did, and the fact that they grew up in a house of 14 kids, which is just incredible. Yeah. So that to me is what hooked me, because I know about the escape. I mean, I didn't know about all the details as far as the Mickey Cohen connection, the Fred Breezy connection. Those that to me, it's like I said, you can't. I mean, Martin Scorsese and David Mamet couldn't write a screenplay without including that kind of. I mean, you just think it sounds like a movie.
There's so much.
But the fact that you guys spent so much time on the development of their characters and who they were growing up is what really, really hit home for me. And then by the time you're really rooting for these guys, you're rooting for them. They're very sympathetic, not just as characters, but as people. And their circumstances. They didn't let their circumstances control them. They controlled their circumstances. And they didn't do it in a violent, classless, crass way. They did it because they're two people that are taking care of each other. And, they realize if we want to survive in this world, we got to get out of here. And, we got to go somewhere else. So it's like, you're really rooting for them.
Yeah, I have to agree. I mean, I've been to Alcatraz. I lived in San Francisco. I've known about it, but I wasn't really that interested in it. So when I read your book, I was like in it. I read it in one day. I was like, oh my God, I had no idea, because it's the relationship between the brothers. It's getting to know who they are as human beings and understanding that this isn't just about an escape. This is about these two guys and their life story. And they really do come off very empathetic. I mean, you really care about them. I did anyway, and I was surprised really by that.
Well,
Because
one of the things that people have written to us who've read the book, and they'll reach out to us to let us know what they think about it, which I always appreciate. Even if you don't like it very much, I still appreciate the fact that you took the time to read it, because that's, you know, that's a commitment, and so I value that. But several people have mentioned specifically, it's like, well, why did you, when they first started the book, when we go through their childhood and their growing years, both with the family when they were starting to get into trouble and incarcerated, you know, to kind of higher and higher levels of incarceration, to prison and finally federal prison, was, well, why did you bring all that in? They didn't quite understand why we're doing so much backstory. And then later when we get to Alcatraz and what happened after, that's like, oh, now I get it. Now I understand the, you know, the skills that they had developed over the years, the experiences that they had, like, you know, like with the dummy heads and with the towing in the river with the boats, and just, you know, John was a painter. He, you know, he had a very creative side to him. Also, Ken has talked about many times how ingenious they were, you know, because they were so poor, they had to just make everything that they had that was useful to them because they couldn't buy it. They didn't have the money for it. Well, all those things come into play at Alcatraz when those skills were exactly what they needed to escape. And we had to establish that way back in the beginning of their younger years, where it's not like they just suddenly became ingenious at Alcatraz. Like, oh, we got this all figured out. Like, where did that come from? Well, it was there.
I always tell people that all that backstory was just a dress rehearsal for Alcatraz. It was all a dress rehearsal. And the fact that they were so sympathetic, that's what made them so sympathetic, because you saw these kids as just young kids growing up, just trying to get through the day and trying to, you know, steal things just to get by, and, you know, making stuff for their other siblings and whatever, clothes or car parts, or stealing whatever they can do. It's a combination of, hey, we're going to have some fun, but we're going to get something out of it. But, you know, you look at other prison escapes, like the one that they had a few years ago in New York State, where those two guys, you know, they conspired with one of the prison guards, a female, who one of them was having sex with, and they were able to get, you know, they caught those guys in a week. But those were two very dangerous guys.
Right.
They were like, they were both in there for, I believe, homicide. And so they were out there, and they eventually turned on each other at one point. And so those, when you know, and there's a HBO series on that, a limited series on it, and you really saw what brutal people they were.
Right.
And it's like, but these, you know, John and Clarence,
They weren't.
they weren't.
They were not.
What's so lovable about them, because you want them to succeed. You want them to go to Brazil and survive and have a bunch of kids and have a good life. Like, you want them to go and live. So that to me was the most, and the writing, you guys, was amazing. I mean, I really think you guys did a fantastic job.
Yeah.
The writing was very engaging, and I really enjoyed the book. But I think that one of the best stories was that when they went to San Francisco and Mickey Cohen sent them up there, I love the foreshadowing. I'm like, this you can't even make this is like a movie. You can't even make this up. This is like the perfect foreshadowing for your plot point that's about to happen. So it's just all those little things, nuggets in the book that we just didn't know. And
I know, and it's amazing when you look back at some of the stories that my relatives would tell me about how that their trip to California just changed them. Like, they came back a different person. You know, they left looking at, and we have photos of them, you know, leaving, and they're in dungarees, no shirt, you know, just, they look like driving an old car.
They look like the cast of The Outsiders. They went out there and then they came back to cast the Casino.
Yes, exactly right. I mean, and then all of a sudden they're back and they have all this cash, and now they're dressing, you know, patent leather shoes, and they're going out and buying brand new cars, and it's just their whole lifestyle changed.
But their characters didn't.
Their characters didn't, but they started getting a taste of the lifestyle that they wanted.
Sure.
And
they were young.
Once they had that taste, there was no turning back. You know,
that's the thing.
There was no going back and working in a field.
No, they were so young.
And making 25 cents an hour. That wasn't going to happen.
No, and that's the thing too. It's like they were young guys. They go out, they see the high life in California, Las Vegas, whatever, and they're like, "Oh my God, this is the world that we've been dreaming about." Right. And how do we stay in this world? You know, and of course, You're a young
Well,
kid.
and I'll wait. Go ahead, Mike. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, and that's the other thing that people have reached out to us that have read the book is like, I never knew any of this. I never heard this before. Just again, all the background and just even information from Alcatraz that we uncovered that, with Whitey Bulger's help, first person account from inside the prison saying, this is what prison life was like. This is my relationship with them. I knew them very well. He spoke very highly of them. He really respected them tremendously. Ken has shared the story that the first time that, Whitey ever saw John, it reminded him of
Steve McQueen.
Steve McQueen. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
That even from the beginning, he just really was drawn to him and respected him. And you get this information that you're not going to get anywhere else that is telling the actual story of what happened, before, during, and after the whole Alcatraz episode. So they're very grateful to because when you hear all things Alcatraz, documentaries, books, movies, well, not those, there's just the one movie, but anything that's produced about Alcatraz, they always go to the prison and to the escape, and it's just a rehash of the same story again and again. And when we were approaching literary agents, that was one of the first questions they did. Well, how is this story any different than all the other Alcatraz stories? It's been done to death. We know exactly what happened, because usually those books are very well researched. They give you the historical record of what took place, but they don't give the personal side. We give the historical and the personal, and that's what we would say to them. It's like, Ken is the nephew. He has information nobody has. So you're going to get a completely different perspective on what happened with Alcatraz, how they got there, why they did what they did, and then what happened afterward that made their escape a reality. That most people say, well, I think they drowned. I don't think they made it because, they just didn't have the skills to survive. And it's like, are you kidding? They had those skills, and they had them when they were little kids.
Exactly.
Well, and something else too, all the other books that I've read, and I'm assuming that some of these books had access to the FBI files, just like Mike and myself did. Most of the books still painted Frank Morris as the brains behind the escape. But if you go and you read the FBI files, you get a totally different view. I mean, it doesn't even come close to saying that Frank Morris was the brains. I mean, just about every inmate that they interviewed that knew them all came back and said John was the mastermind behind it, or, if anybody was the leader, it was John Anglin. Alan West gives the detailed about how that he goes to John Anglin. He doesn't go to Frank Morris. Frank Morris was invited after the escapes actually started kind of, taking place, not the escape, but the planning of it. So it's almost kind of like our book goes and looks at a different view of this, even the details of the escape. Whereas all of the other books, even though a lot of them have a lot of good historical type information around the Alcatraz prison itself, none of them take the avenue that we take in this book.
Yeah, no, I think you basically reveal the origin story of your uncles, which is, I think when you look at anybody, if you're doing any kind of biography or anything like that, because it's like a biography as well, where you're just kind of, you want to find out what that person, that's why I like reading biography. I used to love reading them, just finding out like my favorite, film directors or actors, and you read and you see where they came from and what motivated their choices to make them who they were. And that's what you get with a good portion of this book. And I think the first third of the book, if not a little bit more, is all that buildup of who these two guys were. And then when you which makes it even more palatable, and the fact that when they do escape and we find information that they made it, and that photograph, and to me it's like, you guys have analyzed these photographs so great. Like when we did that analysis of the way John wore his wristwatch, I mean, I went through all those photographs after that, and how he wore it high. I don't know anybody who wears their wristwatch high like that,
right?
Ever. I mean, that kind of detail, it just makes it, all the work you did beforehand just validates everything that you're discovering right now, and what we're discovering with you on this journey as we continue down this investigation to prove that, really definitively prove that they were there, and they had families, and they lived
Right.
they lived a life after Alcatraz, it's an amazing story. It's an
Yes.
amazing story.
Well,
It's
and one of the things that we're also finding, with the book, as we get a newspaper article written or interviews done, doing this podcast, of course, and we've done other podcasts. People, if either we reach out to them to say, hey, we'd like to be on your show, or we'd like to do, like a book review or an interview. When we say Alcatraz, they just light up. Like, oh, Alcatraz, yeah, let's do something about it. I love Alcatraz. I've always wanted to do Alcatraz. Or they'll reach out to us. They come to us saying, hey, I do a show. I heard about the book. I've always wanted to do an Alcatraz story. Well, even when we did Expedition Unknown with Josh Gates, one of the things that the producers told us was, Josh has always wanted to do an Alcatraz escape show.
Mm-hmm.
And what do you guys bring to the table that's going to make it interesting for him? It's like, he wanted to make sure, again, we were telling a new story. It's not just the same story told again and again. So the interest is still just as strong as it ever was. And, the fact that several million people visit the prison every year, still, it's one of the biggest tourist attractions in California, largely because of the escape. It's the escape that has kept Alcatraz prison on the map.
Absolutely.
Oh, well, so, you're talking about keeping it in the forefront. I've had young kids as old as young as like 12 reach out to me and ask me questions, want to be interviewed. They want to interview me for a book report that they're doing, and even next week, I'm going to be on a Zoom call with a high school teacher in his class, his history class. I believe it's in Southern California, next Wednesday. And so they're gonna interview me, ask questions. They reached out to me and said, "Hey, would you come on and let us ask you questions?"
That's
Like,
cute.
absolutely, yeah. But here it again, it's just young people still are intrigued about this mystery.
Yeah.
They want to know something about Alcatraz. Everyone knows about it. So that's what's so crazy about it.
Yeah, no, it's an iconic name. It's an iconic, it's so funny how they, it's because of them they got shut down pretty much. And it's just and it's funny how when they put them in there, but he's like, well, they escaped we don't want them to escape from any place else. And they're not escaping from here, and nowadays, the equivalent to that is the one at Colorado State, the one that's like all push button, super modern. They're basically no touch. They just walk through sally ports. I mean, that's an escape, one that you can't escape from. So it's not, and it's in the middle of Colorado. So I just think it's so, any kind of escape like that from anything is just, I mean, they've written obviously, Count of Monte Cristo. I mean, it's like Papillon. I mean, it's like these stories where these people escape from these horrible places and for freedom. It's all about freedom. That's what this book is about. These guys are, every time you couldn't lock them down, wherever, even when they were the age of 11 and 12, they'd figure out how to get out just to get home because they just wanted freedom. They couldn't, they were just, it's amazing.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, this was awesome, guys.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I think what we'll do is we're gonna reach back out, Art, if you're watching, we're gonna reach back out to you, see if you'll want to come back on the podcast and discuss the book with us, as well as we have some other people set up as well. But really interested to hear your perspective on that letter when we saw it, and well, we're gonna post it on the website, have other people comment on it and stuff like that. But I definitely, when I first looked at it, like the first thing I looked at was that San Bernardino. I'm like, that doesn't make sense. What?
No, sorry, earthquake. We're gonna have an earthquake.
Yeah, an earthquake?
Yeah.
Oh, that's kind
That's
of interesting.
Yeah.
Well, every day.
At least I didn't scream this time. Last time I screamed earthquake.
We had one last week. I was sitting outside and just sitting in a chair, like on the ground. And we got the I guess they had that new early warning system now.
Mm-hmm.
And literally 2 seconds, you got a 2-second warning. I got on my phone, and I'm like, going, "Oh, are we having an earthquake?" And then all of a sudden, you feel just rolled a little bit.
Yeah, that was a little one, but
that was a little one.
I felt it. Yeah. So no, this is great. I'm excited to hear what Art has to say about the letter.
and one thing, anyone who watches these podcasts if there is any company out there, and I'll throw it out, because I have the original photo of them standing by the anthill. If anyone's out there that wants to take a challenge and analyze this photo, I'd be more than happy to throw it up against anything they want to use.
Yeah.
Any current technology.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Like I said, to me, like the thing that we talked about in the podcast earlier is the fact the way they stood, the way, I think Clarence was standing, that little thing on his wrist that was there. And then that watch. The watch.
Yep.
Who wears their watch like that?
It just,
no one.
To me is just.
That's too coincidental.
Yeah,
Sorry.
that's like one of those.
The whole thing is too much similar characteristics of them.
Yeah.
Right.
When you look at even in the description, that's how I originally found it. Was I was looking at the photo and I was reading the FBI files and I was looking at the description of John and Clarence, their height and the color of their hair, and I was like, oh my gosh, it just hit me. I was like, this is John and Clarence. Because you could see it.
One last thing, because I don't know if I asked you this. What did your mom think of that photograph?
The first time I showed it to her, after I discovered who was in the photo, she saw it right off the bat. She was like, oh my gosh, that's my brother. It's almost kind of like you look at something until someone tells you who they are.
Mm-hmm.
Then that's when you see it, especially if it had been years since she had seen them. So
she recognized him right away.
Oh yeah, she recognized him right off the bat, and I was totally convinced that was him, even before it was ever first analyzed by Biker Street. I was totally convinced. You could not have. I put up a bet with someone with a bottle of 18-year-old Macallan, and I walked away with the bottle. So that'll tell you who won.
Very good. All right, guys. So we'll see you next week, and then look forward to more information, and we'll talk about what we're going to be working on in the future.
We've got some exciting stuff to work on.
We do.
Yes, we do.
We do. All right.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.